Thank you, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Daphne to you this afternoon. Daphne will be talking about a cultural approach to disability. Daphne is a psychologist, a graduate of the University of San Marcos in Lima. Her specialization is in the prevention and intervention of abuse of children and adolescents from the Women's University of the Sacred Heart. She has more than 25 years' experience in the care of vulnerable people, including victims of violence. So I'm sure she will have a lot to offer us this afternoon. So I do welcome you and thank you.
Do you hear me? No? Okay, do you hear me now? Perfect. Thank you for the presentation and the invitation. Today, I will read my presentation if is okay. Okay, thank you. Today, I would like to share, based on my experience working in a pluricultural country like Peru, some notes about disability and culture. Before getting into the subject, would like to share a little bit of the Peruvian context, which is from where I am speaking today. Peru, a pluricultural country. Peru is a rich and complex country in terms of culture. Thus, today 48 different languages are spoken, most of them in the Amazon jungle. These 48 languages correspond to 55 existing native groups, 51 Amazonian and 4 Andean. Each of these communities preserve, at least in part, their traditions, language, customary institutions, etc. This is a great challenge when it comes to accompanying victims of violence and people with disabilities, since conceptions of violence, sexuality, development, and health are vary from a culture to another. At our institute, we have had experience with communities in Lima who are more Occidentals, but who may be second-generation immigrants from Andean and Amazonian areas. Experiences with Andean communities, with women victims of violence, and with human rights activists. An experience in a village in the Peruvian jungle with a predominance of Aguajún people. To understand a little more about cultural differences, I will tell you about those experiences. One intervention we did last year was in the town of Santa María de Nieva, 15 hours from Lima. To get there, you need to go to the north to Chiclayo City by plane, then by bus to Bagua City, and then by truck to Nieva town, to town of Nieva. Although there is police in the town, there is not prosecutor. The closest one is 7 hours by truck in Bagua, and there is a cost of approximately 20 euros to get there, money that most people in the area don't have. Let's imagine that a family decides to file a complaint of abuse against a family or community member on an authority in the area. Possibly, they must go to Bagua. The visit to Bagua alone for the girl and her mother is 40 euros each way. Then she will have to return for the interviews and to testify at the prosecutor's office. For a city where the average monthly income is 300 euros, this is impossible. Imagine now that a mother needs to take her children to the school and one of them has visual disability. If she lives in Nieva, there will be no problem. The specialized school is there, but if she lives in the other communities, she may have to walk to the river and then take a boat trip for 3 hours to get the only specialized center in the area. These conditions make it impossible for this child to attend the school. However, Aguajún communities have a customary authority system that is alternative to a state system. Each community chooses an apu or chief, who oversees resolving conflicts, imparting justice, etc. His role is important in a space where the police or the state entities, such as prosecutor office and judiciary, don't reach, or where the community does not trust the state entities. Therefore, the existence of the APU becomes vital. However, sometimes there are interventions in these systems that threaten the welfare of the victims, such as so-called reparation, which is a monetary agreement reached between the family and the abuser to repair the consequence of the sexual abuse. Nevertheless, it's important to know that this is not a generalized solution, but it occurs less and less frequently. However, in this process, the need to protect other girls in the community, care of the victim, need, etc., it's not necessarily considered. In the case of people with disabilities, there is little can be done from the communities or the APU. Another thing that happens at even the most remote Amazonian communities is that they function in a clan relationships. So it can be very difficult for the mestizos who come from Lima, who are from the cities, who are no Aguajún people, to work on prevention and protection issues. In our intervention, we learned of various experiences of violence in which no matter how hard the teachers or work teams have tried to intervene, the community has decided to resolve the situation on its own. It's important to clarify once again that this is based on the lack of access to protection institutions and distrust in state entities. Another experience I would like to share is an intervention addressed to Andean women in Cusco City, in the province in Quispicanchi. To get there, you need to take another plane to Cusco City, then a bus to Quispicanchi City, and finally a truck by Ocongate town of Ocongate, a community 2 hours from Quispicanchi, approximately 4,200 meters above sea level, a place where the state entities don't reach either, and where many times is the community that imparts justice. In this case, we work with teenage mothers and young women who had histories of violence both in childhood and in their current relationships. A characteristic of the work in the Andes is collectivity. So group work was a very valuable tool and was identified as an important resource for young women. It should be noted that we arrived in both communities after a familiarization process, which was carried out with the support of the apostolic works of the Society of Jesus in the area. These institutions have years of intervention and knowledge of the communities, and our intervention have an art component too. And we use art as a tool because that allows us to communicate beyond verbal languages, because it's transversal to different cultures, and allow us to give a voice to those who have no voice. Some notes about disability in Peru. According to CONADIS, National Council for the Integration of Persons with Disability of Peru, 10.3% of people in my country have some type of disability. Of these, 28.5% live in poverty, and only 24.9% have complete high school. We have a regulation that requires all educational institutions to be inclusive. However, most of them, especially state ones, don't have the resources, infrastructure, and work team to properly attend to the needs of children and adolescents with disabilities. Research addressed in 2020 with women from Lima and Puno, a city in the Andes in southern Peru, cites the work of Bardales in 2018, in which it was identified that both women and men with disabilities suffer from violence, although in the case of women there is more domestic violence and with a prevalence of sexual abuse. One of the risk factors they identified was the disability situation itself. And they said another study in 2 Peruvian Andean cities in which it observed that family don't function as a support for women with disabilities. Ponce and Freire found in their research that violence against women with disability is transversal in Peru and crosses the different areas of their life, preventing them from fully accessing their rights. Also, there are not adequate and accessible routes to file complaints, and consequently, they opt for silence. To this situation must be added the fact that in general, in Peru, the issue of disability is invisible. Not all people are registered with CONADIS, and educational, labor, and citizen participation needs of people with disabilities are not recognized, and such a basic aspects as physical access to public entities or public transportation as a challenge. Culture and disability. Throughout our time working in vulnerable environments, we have had experience of accompanying people who are involved in situations of violence and who, in addition, have some type of disability. Unlike previous experiences, the workshops that I mentioned before, these approaches have always been individual because people with disabilities have never been present when we work in groups with communities. I will turn back to this point later. What reflections arise from accompanying people with disabilities and communities from different cultures? At this point, I would to clarify. The approach that I'm going to present is based on my own culture, is mediated by my cultural patterns. Therefore, it's incomplete, even biased. And that is something I must recognize. Trying to overcome this bias, I wanted to confront my experience with the experiences of people who have accompanied us in the process of familiarizing with other cultures. So that is not only my voice that you will hear, but those of this other person, including some with disabilities or with family members with disabilities. I will approach these issues based on 5 questions. I don't think I have a complete answer to them, but I hope that my reflections will help to continue thinking about it. First question, where do we approach a different culture from? When I began to reflect on how disability was understood in environments different than Lima, my city, the capital city, in fact, I assumed certain things. For example, that the attitudes towards people with disabilities that I was knowing were typical of the native communities, or that these cultures would necessarily have magical explanations for the disabilities, and that all members of the communities I approached had the same ways of explaining difference, include the disability. I did so from my bias and without considering whole the picture, and I was wrong. I found that in the Andean area, there are different understandings of disability, different than Occidental understandings. There may be the conception that a person has a certain condition or disability because she or he has received a harm. A harm is a type of curse from another person or have received another type of curse. This curse may be due to internal family quarrels or infidelity. Thus, when a man is unfaithful to his wife, his lover casts a curse on his wife, and a child is born with a disability. However, this is not the case in all native communities. We learned from the Aguajún community in the Amazon area that they don't consider witchcraft a factor associated with disability. This is although many things, crop failure, family problems, some illnesses are explained by witchcraft, but disability isn't. I was also wrong about where they seek care for family members with disabilities. I assumed that one or with health problems. I assumed that one would always go to the healer or traditional doctor. But people from the Andean area shared with me that care is provided by state entities too, if there is one, such as medical center or a special school. But it's important to note that in the most of communities in the remote areas in Peru, there are not a specialized school or even medical centers. This situation faced me with something I had forgotten and could be easy to overlook. From psychology, we shouldn't forget to need to familiarize with every new community and group. We must get to know the cultural spaces in which are going to work in order not to assume explanations and behaviors that lead us to misunderstand or distance ourselves from the people we want to work with. Thus, the way of approaching involves first understanding the cultural context in which we find ourselves, and based on this, seeing the best way to intervene. We can't simply discredit the belief and ways of acting of people we are approaching. It's necessary to start with respect for the worldview and knowledge of group to be able to work with them and not for them. In this regard, Perez et al. Point out that we tend to discredit the knowledge, wisdom, and form of care of people with disabilities of native communities, and we assume that indigenous is incorrect and inadequate. On the contrary, it is central to go with humility to the context we are approaching, not from the subject of the supposed knowledge, not from the position of professionals who know more about the issues to work on, because they have the scientific and Occidental knowledge. It's important to ask ourselves about the new culture and be open to learning. Let us keep in mind that when we work with people from different cultures from ours, not only they are being transformed and learning, but we are too. Going with that prejudice implied recognizing the resources of other culture to care persons with disability. For example, we can ask ourselves how they integrate people with disabilities, why in this way, how they take care of him, her, what kind of activities do they assign to them. In the spaces in which we have worked, although people with disabilities didn't participate in the workshops, we know that they do participate in community activities if they can be integrated. That is, they can be assigned some task at home, for example, helping her mother or her father, or be taken to the field to collaborate with good work. This will depend on the characteristics of the person. There are cases in which a person is integrated and has leadership roles in the community. This is why we need to understand the factors that influence whether a person with disability is integrated, to collaborate in the development of their autonomy and agency without devaluing the culture and customs. Second question, do the people of the same community look at disability in the same way? Tubino states that cultures are not homogeneous, and within each culture, there are power struggles, elites, and vulnerable people, and invite us not to reify cultures, believing that they are static and immutable, but to accept that they are alive, they change, and that they are not pure because they are always about other cultures. Asymmetries, he points out, are not intercultural, but intracultural. This is reflected in how disability is understood, and how a person with a disability is approached and integrated or not in the community. For instance, we have talked about the belief in a witchcraft. But this doesn't mean that the whole community explains the same theme and believes the same. Positions and beliefs are changing, and other views and points of view are opening, especially among young people. In this way, we can find different positions and attitudes toward disabilities depending on whether the person's parents are young or old, and whether the caregiver is the mother or the grandmother. So, for older parents or grandfathers in the Andes, it's more common to explain disability about witchcraft, but younger parents don't do so and refer to genetic or medical reasons for their children's disability. The same will be true regarding the possibility of seeking autonomy and agency in a person with disability. Younger parents are more open to letting their children have greater independence and encourage their autonomous decision-making, as opposed to the older parents who try to exert more control. There are also differences related to gender. In some of the experience we have known, fathers maintain a distance attitude and even move away from family when they have a child with a disability, and mothers are assigned as caregivers. This will happen with some families, but not with all families in a group. So, approaching a culture different from ours implies understanding it in its complexity, not trying to simplify it in some specific beliefs. Different beliefs and ways of accompanying people with disabilities will coexist in the same culture. Third question, does this belief from native community, does this belief come from native communities? I've just said that when we have had interventions in communities outside Lima, people with disabilities have not participated in the workshops. We can't assume that there aren't people with disabilities in the area, but rather that they are not necessarily integrated into the community. This has to do with several aspects. First, the fact that the areas in which we intervene don't have adequate and accessible spaces, but also that family may tend to hide relatives with disabilities and isolate them. In one case, we accompanied a young woman who had been expelled from her family because of her disability. She got the support of a religious group and finished the high school, and now she's a philosopher. In other cases, the child is placed in the care of the grandmother, and parents don't take care of the child upbringing, sometimes raising them from the community. This appears to be a response to teasings and discriminatory behaviors of which they may be victims. These teasings is associated with belief and myths that we will see later. Now, I want to focus on other explanation. This is associated with isolation. Is the shame and guilt that families in remote communities feel for having a child with a disability. Where does the shame come from? It seems come from the Occidental and hegemonic culture. Thus, there is a widespread idea in the communities where we have been, that disability is a divine design. There are two aspects to this belief. The first, that divine design functions as a test of faith. So, the family that has a child with a disability is facing an evaluation of God from God to see if they are keeping their faith firmly and wanting to stay on the right path. This involves, in some circumstances, adhering to a particular church or religious group, that is the one that maintains the true path to God. On the other hand, the divine design can appear as a punishment. There is a sin committed by the parents or the whole family. They have distanced themselves from God. They have been bad parents, bad persons, or bad Christians. And as a result, the family is punished. In these cases, it's not only parents, but the whole community that wonders, what are they paying for? What have they done to have a child with these characteristics? Regarding beliefs that come from Occidental culture and that maintain discrimination against people with disabilities in Native communities, Escobedo speaks of ableism as an Occidental and modern phenomenon and wonders what position people with disabilities would occupy in Native cultures in which the role and principles were complementarity and balance, and not high productivity. The same author and Moctezuma Valderas affirmed that the concept of disability doesn't exist in many of the original cultures in Latin America. On the other hand, Moctezuma Valdera points out that in various American cultures, people with disabilities have been revered and respected as they have been attributed as sacred gift. A very different posture from the discrimination and exclusion they currently suffer. Along the same lines, a colleague who works on mental health and spirituality issues in Awajún communities pointed out a similar belief in Native communities, specifically about people with psychosocial disabilities. The point of the view about disability would be very different in ancient cultures. In Mochica culture, for instance, is a culture from the northern Peru, a pre-Inca culture. Mochica culture, for instance, have many clear representations. We can see some of these in the picture that illustrate people with physical disability as elite members. We know that they are elite members because the clothes, and there are different clothes between the first and second one with the third one. The first and second, there are elite members. Another hand, Panco Vilches and Paico Sumaeta point out that people with disabilities were protected in the Incan period, and blind people had specific tasks in agriculture. And Correa Trigoso states that the Inca took care of the support of people with disabilities. In any case, I think it's necessary not to attribute behaviors to Native cultures that may be more a legacy of their contacts with an Occidental culture or an imposition from a hegemonic culture. We should also ask ourselves how to repair the negative impact of these influences. In the case of the divine punishment, for instance, in our communities, in Peruvian communities, and I think in other Latin American communities, how can we as a church work with the communities to change the image of a punitive and violent God who punish families for straying from the right path? And how can we help them to overcome the view of disability as the divine punishment and a deficiency rather than as a form of expression of human diversity? In fact, I'm not sure that I have the answer to this question, but I think that is an important question. We have mission as a church to change the image of God in many Native, and not only Native, in many persons in Latin America and in other countries, I assume too. Fourth questions. What are the myths of our cultures about people with disabilities? I have talked about several beliefs and myths that are specific to some cultures. This, to some extent, is easy. We attribute the myth to the other. We think that it's a Native culture that have certain myths and beliefs that need to be banished. We don't ask ourselves which are the myths of our culture, and how they affect the person with a disability. In fact, in Peru, some myths are shared among the different cultures of the country, and that, regardless of the place where the person with a disability lives, places him or her in a situation of vulnerability and discrimination. These are some of the myths that my culture has and that have reached that native communities. Some of these myths explain the discrimination and thesis that I've mentioned before. First myth, people with disabilities are like children. I was in a workshop on violence prevention in educational settings with people from different parts of the country, and a teacher said to me, "We are looking at the case of a girl," to be more specific, she said of a child, "who has been abused. How old is she?" I asked her. 32 years old was her answer. One of the situations we have found regarding people with disabilities in Peru is a tendency to infantilize them and take away their agency to decide about their situations and their life, and even about the measures to be taken to face violence. This does not only families but also the environment tend to overprotect and treat people with disability as if they were children who can't take care of themselves or make decisions about their life. In a case we attended a few years ago, a young woman with physical disability came to us for counseling because she had suffered partner violence. She was reluctant to file a report for fear of her family reaction. She was afraid mainly that her mother would look for the boy and do something, but also that she would forbid her to date and go out again. Thus, in addition to trauma, she faced the loss of her independence. Second myth, people with disabilities don't know what they are doing or saying. When I was a university ombudsperson at Ruiz de Montoya, I had to deal with cases of abuse, violence, and harassment. I also received inquiries about situations that didn't involve the university community, but where some guidance was needed. Among these consultations were some about people with disabilities who had suffered violence and were not believed, because it was supposed that the abuse was a delusion due to their condition. And this is very widespread myth. Third myth, disability can be contagious. Right, can be contagious in some places in Peru. This myth has been expressed to me by some people in the Andean area. It's based on the belief that disability is some kind of disease and results in the isolation of people with disabilities. This equating disability with illness generates several other behaviors and beliefs, such as believing that the person can be violent or aggressive, that they get out of control and can't help it, and that their behavior is static and they won't be able to learn other behaviors. I have heard this more about people with cognitive disabilities and psychosocial disabilities than others. And final myth, disability equals lack of capacity. Many people in my culture assume that a person with a disability will not have sufficient skills to succeed and be independent. For example, I remember a young woman with physical disability living in a residential care center because she suffered abuse, a long-term abuse. In the residential care center where she was housed, she was not considered for vocational activities and training because of her disability. When I enrolled her in a vocational training to become an early childhood education assistant, I was taught that she would not be able to handle the job, that the children would make fun of her, and that she would not know how to handle it. This was even though she was one of the few young women in the shelter who had been able, despite of her history of violence and physical disability, to complete high school. And in fact, she finished her training. I don't know how is she doing now, but I hope that she is working in this area. When I talk about all these myths, then I want to indicate that there are challenging aspects related to accompanying processes of people with disabilities in a pluricultural country, because we must deal with myths that become hegemonic. After all, they come from a hegemonic culture, cross different environments, and have an impact on how the person with a disability is attended to, integrated, and participates, and even in how a person can see himself or herself. While at the same time, we attend to a specific aspect of different cultural groups. It implies not only knowing the myths of the other culture, but also those of my own. This implies a personal work to accept how my culture has generated bias and about people with disabilities. Other ways I will continue to relate to them from my prejudice. Final question. Is it just culture? I wanted to end with this last question because it is central to reflect on aspects that are not cultural and that affect the situation of people with disabilities, at least in Peru, I suppose in other countries too. I have pointed out that there are differences in attitudes. That differences are mediated by the possibility of access to information and relevant care. This is not a cultural problem. It's a problem of inequalities faced by a large percentage of population. And it's more evident when we approach the native cultures of the country. Some of the areas where we work are among the poorest in Peru. Thus, the possibility of access to resources for integral development and accompanying of people with disabilities is almost non-existent. Moctezuma Valdera points out that in Latin America, characterized by pluricultural countries, there is a significant depth concerning having intercultural health and education services for people with disabilities. This applies to Peru, where there are institutions that comprehensively address the care of persons with disability from intercultural approach. And I think that it's a good question for all our countries. Is there in our countries spaces to attend people with disabilities with an approach in intercultural processes or not? Because all our countries are intercultural. No one have only one culture. At this point, I would like to recall a case that was shared with me of a woman with a disability from Aguajún community. She had the support of a religious congregation, is other case, with support of the religious congregation too, that worked in the area, was able to complete her studies and returned to the community with higher education, to be inserted both in the community and in the labor market. But for this, she had to leave the community and live in the city. And that is unfair. She needs to lose her roots in order to have education and opportunities. Tubino points out that it's not irrelevant to point out that the intercultural policies of recognitions based on the identity model are structured from a culturalism that ends up displacing to a second plane the distributive injustices and the problem of poverty in which most of the people of our native peoples find themselves, as if the distributive injustices and intercultural asymmetries were independent of the asymmetries and distributive injustice of economic order. This is more evident regarding people with disabilities who are affected by many forms of structural violence. These situations will result in indigenous people with disabilities being some of the most excluded among the excluded, Unfortunately, from the position of hegemonic culture, it is easy to attribute the forms of relations with persons with disabilities only to cultural traditions, and to ignore the inequalities and lack of access to basic rights that are often at the root of these situations. Some conclusions. Our culture generates a look and approach to the person with a disability. That is why it's necessary to know our myths and cultural beliefs to be able to work with them. In other words, it's necessary to recognize that if I come from the hegemonic culture of a country, that doesn't exempt me from the myths and prejudice that I must banish. When we approach communities from culture different from ours, it's not a matter of imposing new beliefs, but of working with people so that they reflect and question the myths that exclude people with disability while revaluing more inclusive and integrating behaviors. In this way, it will be the community that will modify these beliefs and approaches that don't always come from its own culture. To address the issue of disability and culture, then, 2 steps must be taken. First, recognizing our own cultural biases and belief about disability, and also understanding others' views of disability. I've talked about agency and autonomy, but it's necessary to ask whether our understandings of these concepts are valid for Native communities. From psychology, it is important to develop these characteristics, but how they are expressed and used in non-Occidental communities, I don't have the answer for this question either. We can't deny that there are factors beyond the cultural ones that affect people with disabilities, but that especially impact people from some cultures. Where we address the issue of disability in different cultural environments, we must also address the inequality and discrimination suffered by some cultures in our countries, because this places people with disability in a situation of even greater vulnerability. I want to end with a phrase from Tubino that I think sums up the need of inclusion. It is not about including, he said, the others in institutions that exclude them. Rather, it's about making institutions think, rethink, and become inclusive in and of themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go with group number 4 to start.
Thank you.
Who's the-
So our
thank you.
feedback comes in the form of a question. How might we foster protective factors for safeguarding in self, family and culture?
Thank you for that comprehensive question.
Thank you. I answer?
Yeah, switch your microphone. No.
In Spanish, then
I'm
I
gonna
will have help to answer. Creo que no es una cuestión fácil lo que han preguntado,
It's not easy what you've asked.
porque primero tendríamos que conocer cuáles son las creencias y la cultura en la que se desenvuelve esa familia.
We would have to think about the beliefs and the culture that family is brought.
Y a partir de eso poder trabajar con ella.
And from there, work with them.
Creo que es importante para poder llegar a todas las familias que se necesitan llegar, creo que es importante que podamos trabajar en redes, para hacer una formación adecuada y un acompañamiento adecuado a cada familia.
To reach each one of those families, we need a network so we can support each one of those families and their needs.
Ujú. Y creo que es un trabajo de mediano plazo, o sea, cambiar actitudes no es algo que se hace con una reunión o 2 reuniones de la familia, sino que tenemos que hacer un acompañamiento de mediano plazo y constante a las familias.
This is a goal that it's not a long-range goal, and not a short-range goal, but a medium-sized goal where we have to accompany the families and grow with them little by little.
No sé si respondí la
I don't know if I
pregunta.
answered that.
Thank you.
Group number 8.
Thank you. We had lots of discussions and came up with a question that incorporated everything we were kind of talking about. We were wondering, what responsibility do you think the church has to change the culture towards disability in a particular area? And then where does the majority of that responsibility lie? Is it with individuals or is it with people who have more control and power within the church?
¿Cuáles son las responsabilidades también en un contexto con respecto a las una familia, una sociedad con unas responsabilidades con respecto a las personas con
Como familia y como sociedad. Me parece que tenemos diferentes niveles de responsabilidad.
We have different kinds of responsibility.
Hay un primer nivel que tiene que ver con lo que la misma familia tiene que hacer o puede hacer para acompañar en el desarrollo de su hijo o hija con discapacidad.
The first level is what the family has to do, accompanying their child and their specific needs with a disability.
Ujú. Un segundo nivel tiene que ver con la comunidad, cómo la comunidad puede… I forgot my words in Spanish too. Cómo la comunidad puede cuestionar sus mitos y creencias
How the-
para tener una actitud diferente hacia las personas con discapacidad.
How the community can challenge their own beliefs and myths about disability so they can participate.
Y creo que hay una responsabilidad bien importante que no debemos olvidar, que es la responsabilidad del gobierno, del Estado, porque las familias pueden cambiar su actitud, las comunidades pueden cambiar su actitud, pero si no tenemos entidades del Estado que den el soporte necesario, que den la atención que se necesita para acompañar los procesos con personas con discapacidad, poco es lo que podemos hacer.
So the third level will be the state. If we have changing attitudes in family, changing attitudes in community, but the government and the state doesn't have entities that change attitudes as well, there's little that we can do.
Y creo que en ese sentido también es importante que desde el rol que tenemos nosotros podamos intervenir para que haya mejores políticas de Estado para responder a las necesidades de las personas con discapacidad de acuerdo a cada una de sus culturas.
So the role that we play is very important because we have to push the policies to be changed to protect those people with disabilities and their safeguarding.
In every different culture.
In a
In
different
every
culture.
different culture.
Thank you very much. Could we hear from Group 2, please?
This is Christiane speaking. So our group discussed heavily all of the different common themes that we've seen throughout this conference, and we identified the major need to be, the disability process. Nothing about us without us is the theme that we really came to. and ensuring that there is a respected experience and understanding that that is, worthwhile listening to. So commonly we've seen many disabled people not included in the conversation, and so we need to change that. We need to hear and listen to their voices as a way of supporting families and the communities around them. If we develop procedures and policies that support people with disabilities, that will hopefully then relate to, into the future, having people feeling both welcomed and included within the church, which inevitably will create safer and better environments for all.
Gracias por el comentario. Estoy de acuerdo con lo que dices y justamente tiene que ver con lo que decía hace un momento, pero bueno, aplicado a la iglesia, ¿no? Cómo como iglesia desarrollamos también políticas y acciones que nos lleven a tener una iglesia inclusiva en donde todas las personas sean atendidas y escuchadas. Creo que es un reto importante que tenemos por delante como Iglesia Católica.
I agree with what you said, and it applies the same as I talked before about state. We have to create policies so the church can have actions for inclusion, that everybody can be paid attention to, listened to, and that is a challenge, but it's our role to be involved as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And group 1.
So I actually have one quick question and a quick conclusion. So maybe I'll just read the conclusion first. It's maybe half a paragraph. Love as foundation, restoring trust, facing our past of causing trauma, the need for concrete or coherent best principles, not practices, principles, so it's more general. The innate right to communicate and to be heard. So our question is how to make the invisible visible, to determine specific needs and approaches per person, and to examine ourselves and our approaches or responses to these persons.
Wow, qué difícil. Another difficult question, how to make visible the invisible. In fact, I'm not sure. I think, in Spanish, I think. I think better in Spanish. Creo que se trata de empezar, creo que se trata de empezar primero por nuestra actitud. Creo que todo esto implica primero un cambio personal. Lo decía yo hace un momento, necesitamos hacer un trabajo personal respecto de cómo miramos y pensamos las cosas. Y ese trabajo personal nos permitirá acercarnos a las otras personas, a las que son invisibles para los demás, para el mundo, de una manera más empática y más adecuada. Y eso permitirá que otros cambien su actitud y se aproximen de manera diferente también. Pero también eso es por un lado. Primero eso. Yeah, sorry.
So we have to start with our attitude. Changing attitudes starts with changing personally. First, our attitudes as an individual, how we look at things, how we look at people, how we get close to them, how we become empathic with them. And when we change our attitudes, others will change too.
Y el otro aspecto creo que es cómo llevamos a cabo acciones concretas para integrar a las personas. más allá de las políticas que son importantes o de los protocolos que son importantes, tenemos que llevar a cabo acciones concretas. Por ejemplo, en las experiencias que yo les contaba, conversando con uno de los sacerdotes en el pueblo de Nieva, él me decía que a razón de la conversación conmigo recién había tomado conciencia de que tenía personas con discapacidad en las comunidades nativas y que necesitaban atención pastoral y que necesitaban hacer un programa pastoral específico para ellas.
We need to do concrete actions to integrate people with disabilities. Not only policies and protocols, but concrete actions. For example, when she was talking to a priest in Nieva, a little town where she went, this priest said, now I know there are people with disabilities in my community. There are natives with disabilities, and we need to create a pastoral program that meets their needs.
Their needs and their family needs, because are different needs, the needs of family with a person with disabilities, especially in poor spaces. Yes.
Thank you very much. Group number 3.
So maybe it will be some kind of similarity. So a question, if we could make the switch the perspective in our mentality, so if we could think that the majority of the world has or will have some disability, and how to shift our ministry to that, how to change our attitude, how to break the resistance of priests, for example, and how the church can change the situation. And if we don't give the voice to the people with disability in everyday life, and that they can't decide what to do, how they want to live, how we can make another step to give the language and the power to decide and to say about the abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Más o menos. Preguntan cosas muy difíciles. Your answers are really difficult. Let's see. I think that education is important, and to prepare our children, our young people to understand the difference and the disability not as a problem, but as only a difference, a kind of different and how to express the human being, it's important. I'm not sure if, sorry, I'm a little desconfiada, distrust with adult people. I think that adult people can change their minds, but I think that it's important to work with the new generations in order to look for change in the future, not only now, but in the future, to have persons more empathic, more empathic, people that understand the difference in other way. And I think our mission now is to prepare the people in these ways. Many of us have contact with children, and many congregations have schools and universities. Then there are important places to start to work integrating persons with disabilities in these spaces and teaching all the people in these institutions to accept the difference. I don't know if I've answered the question. No much? Can rephrase? ¿Puede repreguntar? Porque creo que no le respondí la pregunta.
Can you again make the concrete question? Yeah.
It's okay. We were just making some kind of thinking that if we could switch the perspective and start to think in the parishes, for example, that the majority are the people, or we will be the people with disability, some kind of disability. So we need to start thinking how to adapt our service, our ministry to people with disability, because we are the majority.
Ya le entendí ahora sí. I think I understood better. In Spanish better. Creo que es un reto que hay que asumir en cada parroquia y en cada espacio pastoral, y pensar en lo que se llama en educación, la currícula universal, me parece que la llaman en educación, que significa desde el principio que tú haces una planificación de una actividad o de una clase o de un servicio. Tú estás pensando en que esa actividad y ese servicio sea asequible a todas las personas y cualquier persona lo pueda entender y pueda participar independientemente de si tiene una discapacidad o no. Entonces, tener esta mirada desde el principio en que todas las personas tienen que participar me ayuda a poder plantear de manera diferente cómo hago mis acciones pastorales y cómo hago el ministerio en la parroquia o en la iglesia, ¿no? Creo que hay que pensar un poco fuera de la caja, desde una diferente perspectiva de donde pensamos siempre y pensar en todas las diferencias. Creo que hablé mucho, Chelo. I talked a lot. Will be difficult to the translator.
The challenge is that in every church and in every pastoral work, we need to think like if we would in education, using a universal curriculum. So when you start planning your curriculum, your activities, your class, your services, you have to think, how can this be accessible for everybody to be able to participate and understand? How can we make this that everybody is understanding? Look at what they all can do. Helps if we do it from the beginning. Also in this view of pastoral work, how can we minister in a church where everybody can participate? We have to think outside of the box with different perspectives so all can be included.
Better? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we're leaving today with more questions than answers, because all the time there's just more, which is good. I think that's always good. Not that you go home thinking, well, hopefully it was a good conference. I mean, now we can do all this, so we understand. It's good. It's good to have that sense of more questions, more questions. Okay, let's have group number 6.
something that resonated with us in the group was to accommodate the people with disabilities according to their needs, not according to their needs and not according to our needs. For instance, have we considered going to their meetings? Then also adjusting the way we think, having a different mindset, moving away from thinking they are the ones to conform to our way of thinking, doing things, attitude, and so forth. And the thing that came to our mind is the film, which is Children of the Lesser God. I think those who have seen it, they would know what it's talking about. And with that one, we came to the questions as a group. The themes that emerged were the invisible disabilities, where one member in the group termed it as temporary disabled persons. All of us are in this category, most of us, temporary disabled persons. And then the other group, as we termed them, people with disabilities. And we asked ourselves, we found ourselves being in two groups, we and them. Why are we using such terms, us and them? Why do we cut them off? Why do we keep on with this division? And why do they make us uncomfortable when we look at people with disabilities? Even as we preach universality, is it fear of what we can become ourselves? Maybe in a blink of an eye, something can happen and we become like them. So why are they making us uncomfortable? And in conclusion, in our group, actually, we looked at Jesus and we said, maybe we need to learn from him. He never turned anyone away from himself, and he took on himself all our infirmities to make us better. Thank you.
Entendí la primera parte de que no debemos ir desde nuestras ideas, sino de acuerdo con eso. Ya, pero no entendí que se refería con discapacidades invisibles.
I'm just going to say it's okay, we can allow a paragraph question. Just one, that's okay. There was a lot in those questions. Thank you, sister.
Primero, estoy de acuerdo con lo que dice el grupo de que debemos acercarnos a los demás, a los grupos con los que trabajamos, desde lo que ellos necesitan y no desde lo que nosotros creemos. Es un error llegar a una comunidad y pensar que nosotros sabemos lo que necesitan y que nosotros podemos ir a darles lo que necesitan. Nosotros tenemos que efectivamente preguntar qué es lo que necesitan ellos para poder responder a sus necesidades. Tenemos que darles agencia.
I totally agree that we need to get closer to the people that we're working with and meet their needs. Not what we think or I think or assume are their needs or assume what I can give them, but it is important to ask what are their needs and from there start working so I can give them their autonomy.
Y respecto de las discapacidades invisibles, lo que efectivamente las discapacidades que no se ven, pienso en las discapacidades psicosociales, ¿no? Las personas que tienen, por ejemplo, esquizofrenia u otra condición de ese tipo y que muchas veces son invisibilizadas y poco comprendidas y no se atiende su discapacidad y no se atiende su situación y el promedio de las personas no las comprende. Y creo que allí, de nuevo, la parte de la solución, no creo que toda la solución, es la educación, es que las personas conozcamos. Creo que allí para que traduzcas y luego sigo.
About invisible disabilities, disabilities that cannot be seen. For example, the psychosocial disabilities, a person with schizophrenia, for example, and other conditions that are also invisible are not understood. People really don't know. Part of the solution, not all the solution, is education.
Que permita a las personas comprender los procesos que pasan quienes viven con estas discapacidades, pero también que la comunidad y el Estado brinden un soporte para las familias que tienen que lidiar con estas situaciones que no son fáciles de acompañar.
We need to understand the process that goes on through education, what's happening, but also the communities and the state need to provide support, especially for the families that are going through living with a person with an invisible disability.
Thank you very much. I was going to suggest to whoever is going to read the question from group number 9 that you can read it in Spanish, as you are the Spanish-speaking group. So who's our person in group number 9? Ah, perfect.
Okay, I'm representing a Spanish group, and as you want, I have no problem in talking English or Spanish.
Spanish. Speak to us in Spanish.
Okay.
Thank you.
Represento al grupo español y hablo en español porque ellos querían que el español fuera escuchado en la sala hoy, porque representamos a muchos católicos. Nosotros hemos hecho una discusión desde posiciones muy diferentes, los que procedemos de España, que formamos parte del primer mundo, y el resto de hispanohablantes que vienen de América Latina. Entonces, ha sido muy enriquecedor. Hemos hablado de que a veces nos perdemos en... Chelo, te dejo que traduzcas.
So I am speaking in Spanish because our group wanted you to listen to Spanish, as we are the most, the Catholic majority of people speak Spanish. And we talked from different perspectives, from the Spain perspective, that's a European perspective, and the Latin America perspective. And this was a very rich discussion.
Hemos hablado de que a veces nos perdemos en los conceptos teóricos. Por ejemplo, para nosotros el propio concepto de discapacidad es relativo a los recursos políticos y económicos que ayudan o dificultan la eliminación de las barreras que tienen las personas con discapacidad para formar parte de la comunidad y participar de forma activa.
Sometimes we get lost in the concepts and the theory of the concepts. The disability concept sometimes it's related to the resources, the political resources and the economical resources that help bring down the barriers that people with disabilities have to be part of.
En este sentido, creemos que eliminar barreras, que ese apoyo es una de las claves para la inclusión. Y estamos de acuerdo con tu opinión, Daphne, de considerar la discapacidad como una cuestión de injusticia.
So these barriers, bringing them down is a key to inclusion. And we agree with Daphne about disability being something more than disability is injustice.
Creemos también que es muy importante un cambio de mentalidad desde una aproximación cultural y desde dentro de las comunidades respetando sus propios valores.
It's a change of mentality, a cultural approach, respecting each person's own culture and mentality.
Y también creemos que es muy importante de hecho se ha repetido a lo largo de la jornada de hoy, hacer visibles a las personas con discapacidad y eliminar las barreras que impiden su visibilidad y su participación activa en la sociedad. Esa idea repetida de hacer con ellos y no para ellos.
The repeated thing that has been mentioned during this conference is making people with disabilities visible, bringing down the barriers, and also is not doing everything with them and not for them.
Y nuestra pregunta para ti, Daphne, ¿cómo se puede compatibilizar, si crees que es posible, el respeto por los valores culturales con el respeto por los derechos humanos cuando entran en contradicción? Por ejemplo, en sociedades donde el abuso está normalizado.
So our question for Daphne is, how can we respect the values of a culture when they are in conflict with the human rights? For example, when abuse is considered normal in a culture.
Y es un problema fuerte porque en muchas culturas la violencia está normalizada, como está normalizado, por ejemplo, el matrimonio de niñas menores de edad, ¿no? Incluso de 9 o 10 años. Creo que ninguna costumbre o tradición cultural puede estar por encima de los derechos de las personas. Entonces tenemos que priorizar los derechos de las personas, sobre todo de las más vulnerables.
There's a big problem when the culture of violence is normalized. For example, child marriage, girls that are being married at 9 or 10 years old, but the cultural values can never go over the human rights, especially with the most vulnerable.
Por eso creo que en ese sentido tiene que intervenir el Estado, pero haciendo una intervención que comprenda los valores culturales y que los ayude a modificarlos. Tener leyes claras que protejan los derechos humanos en paralelo a intervenir con los grupos para ayudarlos a cuestionar y cambiar las ideas y las costumbres que pueden ser nocivas para sus miembros.
So the state has to intervene, taking always into account the cultural values, understanding them, and then making laws that protect human rights, that go on parallel to intervene with the groups to help them change their customs and traditions to respect human rights.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, group number 5.
All right. Thanks to my group for a nice, broad discussion. How can we, all in the church and in the world, different professions, acknowledge our own fears and vulnerabilities or lack of knowledge or cultural biases so we can support people, be in proximity to them and see them as people first and not disabilities first, and then help them to fully understand that God is a loving God, not a punishing God, and that God has given each of us ability and purpose in our life. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cómo como iglesia podemos acompañar a las personas que son vulnerables desde nuestra propia vulnerabilidad y con nuestros biases, cultural biases, y viendo que Dios es un Dios amoroso. Ya, sí entendí. I understood everything. Oh, great. Pero respondo en castellano. Creo que el primer paso es darnos cuenta de nuestros propios no importa, de nuestras propias creencias culturales y cómo suponen una forma de mirar y de aproximarnos a la otra persona. Si lo reconocemos, vamos a poder aproximarnos a la otra persona de manera más empática y adecuada y sin invadirla, voy a usar esa palabra, con nuestras creencias. Lo más peligroso creo que puede suceder es que yo me acerque al otro sin haberme trabajado primero, sin haber identificado primero mis creencias y los biases. Se me ha ido en el término en castellano, el bias de my culture bias. Eso es lo primero.
We have to work on our own beliefs, our own biases first, our own cultural biases. And then we get close to the people, first recognizing my biases and my cultural differences. Then I can be empathic without invading, using especially this word, invading with my beliefs. I need to work on my culture, my cultural biases, and then approach the person.
Y además de ese trabajo personal, cómo trabajamos como iglesia, porque para que la gente las personas se quiten la idea de Dios como un castigador. Yo creo que es con el ejemplo de vida que damos como cristianos en gran medida, ¿no? La forma en que nos aproximamos a las otras personas, en que las cuidamos, en que las acompañamos en sus procesos, da una imagen de Dios. Pero también creo que es importante ir cambiando poco a poco los discursos que todavía se mantienen en la iglesia y que ayudan a pensar en este Dios castigador. Entonces, incluso, primero allí y luego cuento la otra historia.
So first, also, we need to, after we looked at our personal work, we need to work as a church. People take this idea of God as a punisher, but with our example as Christians, how we treat people, how we accompany people, how we care for people, we can change that idea of God being a punisher. If we need to change the discourse or how the church talks, that God is not a punisher.
Recordaba una situación de cuando yo era pequeña y estuve en mi catequesis de primera comunión y me enseñaron que Dios castigaba. De hecho, 40 años después, les enseñaron lo mismo a mis sobrinos en la catequesis de primera comunión. Entonces, por lo menos en el Perú, en algunos lugares, el discurso sobre Dios no ha cambiado, lo que decimos sobre Dios no ha cambiado y mantenemos y ayudamos a que se mantenga esa creencia. Entonces, creo que es bien importante cuestionar las formas en que enseñamos sobre Dios y en que hablamos a los niños sobre Dios. A mí me ayudó mucho entrar a trabajar con los jesuitas, porque ellos confrontaron la imagen de Dios que yo tenía y me ayudaron a cambiar mi imagen de Dios. Pero eso tiene que ir de la mano con los discursos que como iglesia damos, que todavía siento, por lo menos en el Perú, son muy diferentes. Hay partes de la iglesia en el Perú que son muy progresistas y partes que son muy conservadoras y que mantienen esa imagen de Dios. Entonces, como iglesia tenemos que trabajar en eso primero.
So there was a situation. As a little girl, my catechism for my first communion taught me that God was punishing. And 40 years later, my nieces and nephews had that same catechesis saying that God punishes 40 years later. So that's at least what happens in Peru, that discourse of the church, of God punishing us hasn't changed, and we continue to perpetuate this idea of God. We have to question ourselves on how we teach about God, especially to children. It wasn't until I started working with the Jesuits that they confronted my idea of God and made me change that image that I had of God. It was a different church for me. But still in Peru, there are a number of churches that still teach these old views of God. So the church has to change. There's some churches that are very progressive, but there are others that are very conservative and still teach this kind of God to people.
Thank you very much. I also made a deliberate mistake a few minutes ago, just to check who was still awake in the room. It wasn't personal, Bernie. We've known each other long enough now that it wasn't personal. Could I have the question or feedback from Group 7, please? Thank you.
It's a comment. Perhaps a way forward in terms of change of attitude within the church is to emphasize the common baptism that underlines the value, worth, dignity, and diversity, or differently abled reality of all people.
Okay. I'm agree. I'm agree, it's all. You just agree.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, life is a constant surprise and safeguarding. And I'm going to open the floor just for a few minutes. I know people are tired and it's been very warm today. Any final questions, comments from any? Oh, we have one already. Perfect. Thank you.
So thank you, Daphne, for your very detailed and rich discussion. So I have done similar research in the U.S. Catholic Church. Why are we, why does this persist, right? And I similarly came up with 5 threads of what I call the shadow narrative, but, so the myths that I discovered, and these are in church documents, they're in pastoral experiences that when I'm talking with clergy and pastoral leaders, as well as experiences of folks with disabilities. And so the first is, folks with disabilities are an opportunity for charity, an object of pity. The second is that they're the perpetual child, wholly innocent. The third is that they have a special connection with Jesus and the cross, even participate in his redemptive suffering. And also are a model for how they live with their cross, which is their disability. Then the fourth is you do the best you can, but it doesn't matter because God's got them covered with one of the other 3. And that's really the persistent problem. That's the problem, the friction, right, in helping in us moving forward, because God's got them covered. And then the fifth one is that, well, they're actually not quite human, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But in doing so, within the Catholic social teaching, right, we draw from the social sciences on what to do. And so there's interesting research in the motivated theory of empathy that talks about if you foster a sense of identity, so you have to find that empathic connection. You need to foster a sense of identification, and the way we do that is not by talking about the disabled. And as much as, our theology is beautiful, it hasn't been doing the job, okay? So because folks with disabilities are still others. So before we can actually affirm our common dignity and baptism, folks without disabilities have to identify with the life and experiences of folks with disabilities as individuals. So for example, I don't know what it's like to be autistic, but I do know what it's like to feel like I don't fit in, and to be known for what I can't do, and to not be welcome, which a lot happens when I'm doing this work, quite frankly. So it's fostering those personal identifications, so with experiences, so either with folks with disabilities directly sharing their experiences, or authentically told stories, because I'm also very cautious against wounding people. But we have to remember that stories have been with us since the beginning of human society, right? So in the very beginning, to figure out who's in my tribe, who's not in my tribe, who I can care about, who I can't afford to care about, right? To organize resources and sharing and protective practices and so forth. And then also to explain the world, right? How could a benevolent God allow for such discrepancies between capacity, ability, and resources? Oh, because I, who have so much, can provide for them. And in fact, that's their job, to need me, right? So the co-opted version of charity, right, that's really patronizing, that Francis is challenging, and Pope Benedict has challenged beautifully too, it's moving beyond that to foster that identification, and with empathy, with the motivated empathy, when they're encountering those experiences, then within a community that professes respect for human dignity, you can foster a desire to change, to recognize past transgressions, and then also motivate a change in behavior. And so I think that's really the linchpin for us to work with. And I'm actually betting my thesis on that, because I'm going to be piloting a program with it in the fall. But I think if we could look at that, because I cannot feel a sense of solidarity with someone I don't relate to. I do not feel that person's a part of the common good if I don't relate to them, nor can I be really interested in their personal development beyond fitting my own needs for subsidiarity. So just, oh, sorry.
Okay.
Once I get going, it's hard to stop.
Dos cosas creo respecto de este comentario. Me parece interesante, no había escuchado, por lo menos de lo que he recabado en el Perú, no había escuchado esta asociación de la persona con discapacidad con el dolor de Cristo o con más cercanía a Jesús por su dolor. Creo que es interesante poder profundizar en esta creencia, ¿no? Y lo otro sobre los recursos con los que se cuenta o no, tanto para dar soporte a las personas con discapacidad como para intervenir en situaciones de discapacidad, creo que tiene que ver con qué tanta prioridad les damos a las personas para atenderlas, ¿no? Las priorizamos realmente como institución, como iglesia, las estamos priorizando, los estados las priorizan, porque eso es lo que nos permite saber si realmente vamos a tener recursos para ellas, que realmente se prioricen las necesidades de estas personas. Es lo que puedo responder del comentario.
Two things that I picked up that very interesting what you are talking about. I really didn't know about this association of disability and the pain of Christ. That belief, I wasn't aware of it, at least not in Peru. And then also, and it would be interesting to continue to investigate and research more about that belief. And the second thing was the resources for support for people with disabilities, not only to have access, but to intervene, depends on the priority that the people are given in the church, in the institutions, in the state. Depending on the priority they are giving, it's the resources and the economic resources that we can find for their support and services.
So those 5 narratives I identified, the 5 threads, there are similar ones with Jewish and Buddhist and other Christian friends that I know, and there are some other ones too, like punishment for sin. So I think in terms of the resources, here's the point. I think, and Father Justin, with his book Us Not Them, which inspired the conferences series that the Italian Bishops' Conference are doing. When someone is one of us, we figure it out. And that's a lot of it, it's with the relationships and, what Sheila was talking about yesterday with being present and visible, participating. Yes, there's things to learn. But again, when you're having a family holiday feast, you're not going to let barriers prevent people from coming in and participating. And so I think I don't want to oversimplify, but I think it kind of is, and being open to actually then learning and admitting what we don't know.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we're going to have to bring the discussions to a close. Can I thank, first of all, interpretation has been going on in so many different levels this afternoon for the last hour. Can we show our appreciation for all our interpreters and translators?